The sultry summer night thickened the air, making it almost palpable, as if the very atmosphere held a secret. Returning home after an exhausting day, no one expected the familiar routine to turn into something entirely different. But that evening, everything changed. In the dim light of the living room, a figure sat still on the couch, a glass of whiskey in hand. The gaze, directed straight into their eyes, held an intensity never seen before. The expression on their face wasn't just weariness, but something deeper, almost intuitive. A mysterious aura emanated from them, as if every movement served a hidden purpose. Something hung in the air, stirring a sense of unease. "You look tired," a quiet, almost whispered voice said, causing them to pause. It wasn't a question, but rather an observation, an invitation to sit beside them. And as they settled on the couch, they felt an intense gaze, as if every movement was being memorized, every detail imprinted in memory. "What are you thinking about?" the question came, an attempt to ease the growing tension. In response, a cryptic smile. "I'm thinking about us, about who we are, and what we need," was the reply. A hand slowly slid down and touched their leg. The touch was familiar, yet it held something new, a warmth that sent shivers down their skin. They took a deep breath, trying to regain composure, but the eyes opposite them held a burning intensity. "And what do you think we need?" Their voice trembled slightly, betraying their agitation. Leaning closer, closing the distance, the other person enveloped them with their presence. "Change," a quiet, almost conspiratorial whisper resonated, "something that will ignite the deepest part of us. I want something bold." The word bold hung in the air, intensifying the tension. This term was rarely used, which only emphasized the unusual nature of the situation. "What are you talking about?" Curiosity grew, mingling with a sense of foreboding. A pause, as if weighing each word, each syllable, which carried its own weight. "I want to see you with other men," came the statement, like a bolt from the blue. A whirlwind of thoughts flashed through their mind, shock and disbelief merged. The world around them stilled, sounds turning into deafening silence. "What do you want?" Their voice came out louder than intended, betraying an attempt to maintain composure. Without retreating, but instead drawing even closer, the other person replied, "I want to share you with others. I want you to be admired, to be desired. I want to see the pleasure in their eyes when you are with them. I want to experience this beside you." Every word struck its target, awakening feelings they hadn't known existed. A part of them wanted to reject the idea, to dismiss it as impossible, insane. But another part couldn't ignore the growing heat in their chest, the dangerous curiosity sparked by these words. "You're not serious," they responded, but their voice lacked conviction. In reply, a smile full of certainty, "I am more serious than ever. I want to see you as you've never been before. I want to see you free, liberated. I want you to discover a side of yourself you haven't yet revealed." Chaos reigned in their mind. Was this truly what they wanted? Did they want to share their intimacy with others? The desire seemed audacious and unexpected. Their heart pounded, their breath hitched. "Why?" The question was barely a whisper. Tilting their head, the other person replied softly but firmly, "Because I know you want something more, even if you don't admit it yet. And because I want to be the one to take you there." These words struck them like lightning. Was there truth in them? Perhaps, deep down, they truly yearned for something like this? It was impossible to escape the gaze opposite them, it was like a mirror reflecting. "This is crazy," they responded, but their voice lacked conviction. Cupping their face with both hands, the other person declared, "It's not crazy, it's freedom. It's being the center of everything." They closed their eyes, trying to dispel the persistent image, but it was futile. The words carried a power that overcame internal barriers, penetrating parts of their soul they hadn't known existed. When the protagonist opened their eyes, Drake was still there, radiating composure and self-possession. He understood the profound impact his words would have. Despite the initial shock, the protagonist knew Drake had touched something deep within them. And he was right. "I don't know," they mumbled, and even to their own ears, their voice sounded bewildered. Drake gave them a calm but anticipatory smile. "You don't need to know right now," he whispered almost inaudibly. But think about it. Think about what this could mean for us. Think about how it could transform everything. With those words, Drake rose, leaving the protagonist alone on the couch, in a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. The stifling night air seemed unbearable, intensifying the feelings they didn't know how to handle. And as they grappled with their emotions, a persistent question arose in their mind, impossible to ignore: what if he's right? What if this is the change I never even knew I wanted? That night, as Drake retreated to his room, the protagonist remained in the living room, their thoughts battling within them like a battlefield. On one hand, disbelief overwhelmed them. How could Drake even suggest such a thing? On the other, a faint spark of curiosity, which they desperately tried to suppress, seemed to ignite with every passing second. Drake had sown seeds in their imagination, and despite their resistance, they began to take root. The protagonist tried to focus on their usual routine: work, the gym, superficial conversations with colleagues. Everything seemed to be going as usual, but internally, something had shifted. Drake's proposition hung over them like a heavy burden, impossible to ignore. They found themselves distracted, their thoughts wandering to scenarios that had once seemed unthinkable. What was this sudden desire? Was it genuine, or merely a reflection of Drake's provocation? One day, sitting at work in front of the computer, they overheard a colleague casually mention that, in her opinion, her marriage had hit a dead end. This offhand remark, made during a coffee break, hit them like a tsunami. Were they, too, mired in routine? Was what Drake was offering something more than a daring fantasy? Was it a chance to rediscover themselves? This idea began to take on a clearer shape when Drake, with his characteristic patience, brought up the topic again a few days later during dinner. He watched them across the table with his calm yet perceptive gaze, one the protagonist had learned to recognize. It was the look of a man who knew exactly what he wanted. "Have you thought about what I said?" he asked casually, as if discussing something mundane like the weather or weekend plans. The protagonist hesitated, poking at their plate with a fork, as if it could spare them from answering. But deep down, they knew Drake deserved an honest answer. He had always been open with them, and now it was their turn to reciprocate. "I have," they admitted, quieter than intended, "but I still don't understand how I feel about it." Drake smiled reassuringly, as if he had expected precisely that answer. He seemed to be in no hurry, and for some reason, this eased the tension. "I don't expect you to make a decision right now," he said in a firm yet gentle voice. "But I want you to imagine. I want you to consider this as a real possibility, not just an absurd idea." That evening, he went further. He didn't just leave his proposition hanging, he began to paint a picture with carefully chosen words that penetrated the protagonist's mind and filled the gaps in their curiosity. "Imagine," he said, taking their hand, three men. 3 men utterly captivated by you. Each of them has a desire they cannot hide. Their every gaze will be fixed on you, as if you are the most precious treasure they have ever seen. The protagonist's cheeks flushed, and they looked away, but Drake continued. "Imagine what it means to be desired like never before. Feel what it's like to be the center of attention, of all desires. And I will be there with you, not judging, but admiring, watching you blossom." The protagonist stared at him, speechless. There was something in the way Drake spoke, in the sincerity of his voice, that made it impossible to simply dismiss the idea. He wasn't just talking about lust. His words conveyed a deeper need, a yearning for intimacy the protagonist had never considered before. Yet, it was not an easy decision. Their mind wavered between the fear of the unknown and the allure of the freedom Drake described. It was in this uncertainty that they discovered a new facet of themselves, a side they desperately wanted to explore. In the following days, Drake subtly began to lay the groundwork. He never pressured them, but imperceptibly dropped details, as if assembling a puzzle. He mentioned names: Scott, Thomas, and Ross, men he said he trusted, people he believed could give the protagonist the experience they so desired. "These are competent men," he said one evening, watching the protagonist choose clothes from the closet. "Men who know exactly what they want, just as you should know what you want." His choice of words was deliberate and precise. He had a knack for pinpointing vulnerabilities, skillfully provoking doubts in established boundaries. Gradually, the thought crept in, what if he was right? What if this was a unique opportunity to uncover previously unexplored horizons of their self? For hours, standing under a hot shower, they allowed each of Drake's phrases to replay in their mind. It was a relentless battle between logic and instinct, between the conventional should and the deep-seated want. The idea didn't just intrigue them, it awakened something more, as if igniting a flame they hadn't known existed. After several days of agonizing deliberation, one night they